District to order. I'm Steve Fancher, your board chair. Welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. Let's go through roll call. Wendy?
Nancy Hendrickson, I did not see Nancy yet. Steve Fancher.
Here.
Eric Mueller.
Here.
Dave Ritma.
Here.
Seth Reeser.
Here.
Shirley Craddock. Saw you, Shirley. Probably still getting settled. Lori Stegman indicated she was not able to come. And there's Nancy coming in. Ken Anderton.
Here.
Corky Collier.
Here.
James Allison.
Here.
Mary Helen Kincaid.
Here.
Tammy Stephenson.
Here.
Eric Molander. Don't see Eric. Ed Washington, I do not see. Bob Salinger. Heather King.
Here.
And Nancy, I saw you come in. 12 members present. That is a quorum.
Thank you, Wendy. And again, thanks everyone for being here. Before we jump to the consent agenda, I hope everyone had a chance to see the agenda for the day, and I'll just walk through it really quickly, give you a chance to read meeting minutes if you'd like to skim those real quick. But basically we have consent agenda only has the prior 3 meetings minutes. We are going to get into budget process with Lori today. Lori Baker, then updates on prior questions and requests with Colin. We're going to go through forecast review with Lori, and then talk about general obligation bond development with Jamie. And there are a few other informational items in your packet besides kind of information stuff related to those specific items. You got the executive director's report, finance report, and contract report. So with that, we're going to move to the consent agenda. And again, we have the October 20th meeting minutes. We have the November 2nd meeting minutes and the November 17th meeting minutes to approve. Does anybody have any questions, comments, discussion about those meeting minutes? Any suggested edits?
And I did not receive any substantive changes. I made a few minor corrections thanks to Eric Mueller for sending those in.
And those were corrected and those were reflected in the minutes that you see in front of you?
No, but they're not substantive. So just like typos.
Thank you, Eric. Any other questions, comments? If not, I would entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda or approve it.
Chair, I would move to approve the consent agenda, October 20th minutes, November 2nd minutes, and November 17th minutes.
Thank you, Eric. We have a motion by Eric Mueller. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. We have a second by Tammy Stephenson to approve the consent agenda, which is the October 20th, November 2nd, and November 17th meeting minutes. We're just going to do a voice vote on this. So all those in favor, please unmute and say aye.
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 Those opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We're going to move on now.
Chair Fancher.
Yes, Nancy?
This is Nancy. I finally found my unmute button. And I didn't vote on them. I didn't have a chance to read them. And so I'm just going to abstain, but thank you. And I'm sorry I wasn't able to do that.
Thank you, Nancy. Thanks for noting that. We'll note that you were abstaining. Let's move now to the budget process, and I'm going to turn it over to Lori. Lori, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see that okay? Great. So this is just going to be a real quick discussion about the budget process and what's coming up. Can't believe we're already there, but we're starting into the budget process for the 23-24 budget year. I have included, actually, we included some level of detail for the process in your packet, but wanted to just point out some of the key dates for you so that you'll be aware of what's coming. In January, at our January meeting, we'll be reviewing forecasts for this current year. So you'll be able to see how we're doing compared to budget this year, and also have some projections on fund balance, which will tell us if there are dollars available to carry forward fund balance into the upcoming year. March 16th is the date that we've got scheduled to take a look at the proposed budget. And there will be room for a public comment at that meeting as well. Then April 5th, we'll have a budget committee meeting with a possibility for you to approve the budget at that point. If you don't get to the point of approval on April 5th, we'll come back on April 20th and take a look at anything more that you need to be able to approve that budget. We have our budget hearing with TSCC on June 7th, and then we're scheduled to adopt the budget on June 15th. We do fall under Oregon local budget law for this entity. And so in order to operate starting July 1, we need to have appropriated our budget by June 30th. There are three things that we're asking for you to take a look at and approve for us today. First being the resolution to approve the budget officer, which is myself. Also a motion to approve the budget calendar that's included in your packet that I just reviewed. And third, we need to select a budget committee chair. So with that, I can take any questions. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Lori. Does anybody have any questions?
I only have a question. Are we acting on these items in the order presented?
Sure.
Okay, no, I just
So
wondered if there was a preferred order to how we were going to vote. So,
I think
okay, thanks.
the first item we're contemplating is what Wendy has placed into the chat, which would be the resolution 2022-12-01, appointing Lori Baker as budget officer for fiscal year 2023-2024 pursuant to ORS 294.331.
Chair Fancher, I'd like to make a motion to approve resolution 2022-12-01, appointing Lori Baker as budget officer for fiscal year 23-24.
Thank you. Seth, we have a motion by Seth Reeser on the table. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion by Seth Reeser. We have a second by Ken Anderton. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, let's do a roll call vote. Wendy?
Nancy Hendrickson,
I vote yes.
Steve Fancher,
Yes.
Eric Mueller,
Yes.
Dave Ritma,
Yes.
Seth Reeser. I'm assuming you're yes. Seth,
Yes.
Shirley Craddock,
Aye.
Ken Anderton,
Yes.
Corky Collier,
Aye.
James Allison,
Yes.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Yes.
Candy Stephenson,
Yes.
Eric Molander, not present. Ed Washington, not present. Bob Salinger,
Yes.
Heather King.
Yes.
Thank you. 13 yeses.
Okay, thank you. The motion passes unanimously with 13 yeses. Thank you all. The budget calendar that Lori went through in the presentation, you can find kind of a detailed version of that on page 25 of the packet. And the second item for us to consider is just approval of the budget calendar. It's not a resolution, it's just a simple approval of the proposed budget calendar.
Mr. Chair, I would move to approve the budget calendar as proposed on page 25 of the packet.
Thank you, Eric. We have a motion from Eric Mueller to approve the budget calendar as included in page 25 of the board packet. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Tanny. We have a motion by Eric Mueller and a second by Tanny Staphenson to approve the budget calendar as proposed on page 25 of the board packet. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any questions, comments, discussion. Let's go through and take a roll call vote. Wendy.
Do you want to just do a voice vote?
Yeah, we can expedite this by a voice vote. That sounds great. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye or yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you all. And the final item we have under this agenda topic is the appointment of the Budget Committee Chair. So we do have a resolution in the board packet on page 26 that will need to be filled out, and whoever we nominate and gets board approval will be inserted into this resolution as the budget officer for fiscal year 2023-2024. So at this time, I guess I would entertain any ideas, any nominations, or any discussion on the topic.
Mr. Chair, I would nominate Tanny Stephenson for chair.
Thank you, Dave. So Dave Rittmeyer
Second.
nominated Tanny Staphenson.
I'll
I'm
second.
sorry, did I hear a second?
Yeah,
Surely I'll second.
Okay, there were 2 seconds, but I'll I'll say Shirley was the second of the nomination of Tanny Staphenson as the budget officer. Do we have any other nominations?
So I just want to clarify, I think what we're doing is appointing a budget committee chair. And the resolution we already adopted Lori as the budget officer. Is that correct, Lori?
I'm sorry, I mistook the resolution that's in the board packet for this. There is no resolution for appointment of the budget committee chair. We're just nominating and
I
going.
think
through
it's
the
just a
process.
motion.
It's just a motion. Sorry about that. Thanks for the clarification. So far we have a nomination for Tanny Staphenson, and we have second behind that. I think we're still open for nominations if anybody has any. I'm not hearing any. So I think at this point we have.
Tanny? Oh, sorry, Chair. I just wanted to say, I hope you're going to ask if Tanny accepts. I haven't seen a smile yet, so.
That's probably a good idea, Nancy. Thank you. Tanny, do you accept this nomination? Have anything to say about it?
No, I will serve at whatever capacity the board chooses.
Okay,
Tanny,
thank
I
you.
owe you 2 sandwiches, not just one now.
I'm sorry, I've confused this item enough already. I think we have a motion to accept Tanny Staphenson as the budget committee chair, and we have a second behind that. And can we take any discussion on that?
I just think he'll make a great chair because he's been doing this for a year. So I like the continuity part of it. And thanks, Tanny, for taking it on.
Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Helen. Any other comments, questions? Not seeing any. Wendy, can we do a voice roll call vote?
Do you want a roll call this time?
Sure.
Nancy Hendrickson,
Aye.
Steve Fancher,
Yes.
Eric Mueller,
Aye.
Dave Ritma,
Yes.
Seth Reeser,
Aye.
Shirley Craddock,
Aye.
Ken Anderton,
Aye.
Corky Collier,
Aye.
James Allison.
Aye.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Yes.
Candy Stephenson,
Sure.
Bob Salinger,
Yes.
Heather King,
Yes.
thank you, it's unanimous.
Excellent. Motion passes unanimously. Well, thank you, Tanny, for taking that responsibility on for all of us.
Thank you, everyone.
We don't have any other scheduled votes today, so next item up is updates on prior questions and requests regarding revenue collection, next steps, property comparison update, and environmental costs. And Colin, you're up.
Thank you. Hi, Colin Erwan, Director of Planning and Public Affairs. And just, I'm going to give you a couple quick updates on the revenue collection work, as well as on some of the property comparisons that people were interested in seeing. And then I'll hand it over on the environmental project update to Carrie. So first off, I just wanted to bring everyone back up to speed on some of the discussions that we've had on the revenue collection. As you have seen in our financial forecasts and all of the modeling work, a very large part of our overall costs are associated with sort of where we are right now for revenue collection. The assumptions that are built into that forecast are that we'll need to collect the revenue via direct billing, and we used quotes that we received from a number of sources, as well as quotes on revenue loss. And so a large percentage of that total revenue picture is tied up in that. And given that information, it was really time to go back out and have a discussion with new information with some of the groups that we have talked to about how we can collect this before. So first, I just want to give a quick review of discussions we've had to date, and then talk about where we're going. So over the course of the summer, staff had discussions with most of the city's financial teams, discussing whether or not they'd be able to collect this on their utility bill. And really the discussion at that point was really focused on the city's utility bills, and not sort of broader arrangements through IGA or anything else. So we were pretty focused on that with not a lot of success, but some good suggestions on where else to look. The city of Portland connected us with the revenue division. The revenue division did say that they would be able to collect this, but it would be through direct billing, very similar to the Portland Arts Tax, and gave us some numbers of what that would look like. Some of those numbers are used in the forecast. We also had discussions with a private utility that provides services for smaller public utilities by contract, and would be doing something similar. Again, this would be via direct billing, but would be with this private entity. And then we also reached out and had a discussion with a firm, and I want to thank Eric Mueller for connecting us with folks out in Bend that the city of Troutdale contracts with. Again, direct billing for us because we don't have a vehicle like a utility bill that this would be delivered on, but we were able to get some really good information. During the course of all those conversations, we didn't have the information, especially with the cities, about just how much it would cost overall, and what those impacts might look like for individual ratepayers, landowners. And so now that we have this information, we are going back through, oh, and sorry, I forgot two other things that we did, sort of more outside the box exploration. One, I want to thank Councillor Ritma for suggesting us taking a look at Multnomah County based on what some folks out in East Multnomah County pay towards a lighting district, to see if there is some way that we could be included on the property tax bill. And short answer is no, but we did talk to Multnomah County and also to legal counsel about that, and it would be construed as a property tax, and therefore was not, we couldn't do it, but it was definitely worth scratching around on. And we also reached out to the state Department of Revenue to see if they would be able to collect. And again, they can help us collect on delinquencies, but there's really very limited tools that they have to actually actively collect on an annual basis. And so just trying to find what was out there. Given the information that we've developed in the financial forecast and really reflecting what some of those collection costs are against what our total revenue needs are, is the information needed to go back out to the cities to have this discussion again, to think of some potentially more creative solutions around how that would be collected either through utility bill or some other kind of arrangement. And so our current plan is we have drafted a letter. We'll be reaching out to each one of the representatives on this board that represent cities that have the utilities to have a discussion about how to bring this back up and how to hopefully find some resolution on this. The alternatives are pretty limited, and so hopefully we can get some good traction and be able to show sort of what this actually costs the individual property owners and why overall this is a better deal for residents of this new district. So those are coming up. The letter is drafted. I'll be reaching out directly to the city representatives to review the letter, to discuss how it is best presented, who should be at the table, or how to kind of bring these conversations back up. I also want to thank the City of Portland staff, Nancy and James, we started this conversation on Monday with City of Portland group as well, and knowing that it's not a quick and easy thing, we want to get these conversations started again. Steve, you have a question?
Colin, just real quick, I'm wondering if it's beneficial for the board members to understand a little bit more about, I think it's intuitive that, you know, whoever collects the money, there's some cost associated with that, but more importantly, it's more about the enforcement tools that are available to make sure that people pay, and what happens if they don't pay. And the advantage to having cities collect this on utility bills is we have this mechanism, potential mechanism to use of basically shutting people's water service off. If they don't pay their bill and they don't arrange a payment plan or come in and apply for assistance, they're just ignoring this. We do have that mechanism where, you know, every month or every other month we go out and we go to potentially shut water off, which is a big motivator to get people to pay. And that's a huge cost that was included, I think, in the initial budget forecast, was that of people just not paying the bill and having no enforcement to do so. Maybe just if the board can understand a little bit more about, if an outside entity does that, is that still available? Is there still some type of mechanism to make sure people are paying, or is it that only available if the cities are collecting it on utility bills?
Thanks for that question or request for a little more information. I think that is really useful. So the numbers that we received about, and it's largely using the Portland Arts Tax as an example, because it's something that is going out to somewhat pretty similar geography. It is something that's sent out annually, and initially the compliance rate for the revenue collection was about 60%. And so those are the numbers that we have in there. And then the terminal compliance rate after 5 years of collection is right around 80%. And so those are also the numbers that we used, because it's a very similar tool. It's individual bills being mailed out to people that are being received. It's not bundled or connected to any other utility. And just as you said, Steve, that there is no stick, right? There's no, you know, it's really hard. We can't turn off flood safety. So we'll continue to provide that. We'll just have these delinquencies, and there's other considerations that the board will need to consider around how to collect that. Really the tools are pretty limited to putting liens and or using a collection agency. So there's pretty limited toolkit as far as the sticks. Mary Helen?
I might have missed it because I had to take a call from my doctor, but if it's, and you just made the comment that the geographic boundaries were pretty similar for the arts tax. Troutdale doesn't pay the Portland Arts tax, and so how are, let's say Troutdale or Sandy, even, well, going to getting a bill from the city of Portland for something that they don't get any, or they might not see that they get a benefit from some. So before all of this, we have to decide if we believe that what we're going to bill them for is what we should bill them for. And I mean, it seems like there's a whole lot of homework that has to go on there. And do we have, will it go out as a generic billing from the flood district, and Portland will handle it? And are there any other bill collection agencies that were consulted or asked for pricing?
That's a great question, Mary Helen. So I don't think we have any real data as far as what that collection will look like. However, the Revenue Division does collect on behalf of, I believe, Multnomah County and Metro for the, I forget which one of the housing tools that they collect through direct billing. But so there is examples there, and there's definitely the ability to, basically have our own letterhead and have all of that designed. So it doesn't have to come through as the Portland Revenue Division. But I think it's a really great point, because hasn't been done. A lot of people, there's a lot of communication that is needed just about why this is happening, what benefits people receive. And it's the same sort of message that needs to be received around a general obligation bond as well. There's that gap that needs to be bridged. And then I think you probably had just stepped out for a moment, and I did note that we did talk to a private utility company that has sort of a separate branch that's aside from their public utility function that contracts with other utility districts, and also a private firm that does this sort of work by contract. So we have discussed with them as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I guess my concern is, I believe that it's the Metro housing bond for houseless, the $64 million bond. Shirley would probably know more about that, but and Multnomah County is, I think, because of the parks bond, not sure, but still, if I lived in Troutdale and got a bill, or it just sounds like it needs to be either more generic or another way. And have you ever explored putting it on people's utility bills? That would only be for the city of Portland. And how would Gresham handle that as well? So I guess I need more information.
It could potentially be for everybody. It's not determined that it would be just Portland. It could be every city puts it on every city's bill. That's still yet to be determined.
Yeah, that's the next stage of the conversations, and I think that's right, Mary Helen. That it would need to be working with those individual cities, and each one of the cities does have their own utility bills that go out, and then also exploring things beyond the kind of narrow scope of discussions that we had over the summer, which was really focused on the utility bill, to see if there are other types of arrangements for collecting that revenue. Councillor Craddock.
Thank you. I was curious, would the utility bill be able to be, would a lien be able to be put on people if let me start over, excuse me. For those that own their house or have our own property, is it possible to put a lien on their house when they have delinquent bills in this dynamic? Would that be an eligible option to encourage more people to pay their bill?
I believe we do have that as the limited stick, and there are issues associated with that. Would the bill be going to the renter? If it's only going to the property owner, then it can be construed as a property tax. And so there are some nuances there, but short answer is yes, a lien can be. So that's one of the few sticks that we have there, and then the consideration of contracting with some kind of collection agency, which is not ideal. If there aren't any other questions, I'm just going to give a quick update on one other thing that was brought up, which was about some property comparisons. As we were bringing forward the property typologies that Echo Northwest developed, there was a question about sort of how much those types of properties are currently assessed, and also a question of without this whole enterprise moving forward, what would those parcels in the managed floodplain pay with the loss of certification and accreditation? And so we actually are making really good progress on getting those estimates for the certification loss. Just as a little bit of a, we've been working with SDAO, the Special Districts Association of Oregon. They have insurance relationships with the country's largest writer of flood insurance. And we have a meeting that's going to be set up the first week of January that is to go through some of those same typologies, and then presume that they are in what's called a special flood hazard area with the levee protection, but without a certified or accredited levee. As a little spoiler, they gave the quote of saying that locations moved into the high hazard flood zone because a loss of certification will be extremely expensive, but we'll actually be able to present what those numbers are. And I just want to stress, those are the numbers that individual property owners would need to pay for flood insurance if we aren't able to move forward with this, as a comparison to what would be paid either as part of the service fee or their current assessment. But I also want to stress that that doesn't take into consideration the real flood safety needs for these investments, as well as any of the zoning changes or other types of changes that the cities would be required to do because of certification. But it really is to narrow the focus of sort of to be able to compare the costs that people currently pay to what they will pay to what the potential costs would be without the certification. So we'll have more of an update after meeting with the insurance brokers in January, and be able to present to the board what information we have once they actually do their computation. I think I saw Bob's hand go up first.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, are you updating who's in the high hazard zone based on, I know the city of Portland, for example, has this new floodplain resilience plan. It's a result of a lawsuit that Audubon brought a decade ago that resulted in a biological opinion that requires municipalities in Oregon to kind of update their mapping and incorporate in some different things than they have in the past. And so I'm just curious what you're using. Are you using the existing maps, or are you using updated maps that correspond to what all municipalities within this area are going to have to go to within the next few years?
That's a great question. So this is really just an exercise based on the similar typology. So in the model that Echo is running, that there's basically a couple different housing types, different lot sizes. There's some averages around commercial and industrial properties. And so it's just using some sample customers within the managed floodplain, sort of using those same types of averages. So it's not a full analysis of what the total insurance cost load would be, but it is to basically just presume with the loss of certification and then accreditation, those properties would be moved into zone AR, which is that you're behind a non-certified levy. What would the cost be? And so I think your point, Bob, is excellent, that it's not black and white. There's a lot of shades of gray in there, and that there's way more than just insurance costs that would be associated with those changes. And there's also just not uniformity as far as every parcel. There's different elevations even within the floodplain.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Mary Helen?
Sort of follow on Bob's, because of the city's flood resilience and plan that's coming up and new boundaries kind of thing. But if, for instance, I live in the floodplain, but the people, I do not, according to, I don't live in the hazard floodplain. People across the street do. And so they would pay a higher premium if we were to get private insurance. Looked into that because, and most of it is because of bank loans, that sort of thing. So can we throw in there kind of a wild card question? Because it's like somebody driving without car insurance, they're just taking the risk of driving without it in case they get in an accident. But is it cheaper for them to get in an accident and pay the cost than to pay an annual insurance rate? So my question is, what it would cost for me and my neighbor across the street, 100 feet across the street, our rates would be different. And you're saying an estimate, well, we have the exact same house, same floor plan, and we live 100 feet across, but it's just where they have drawn the line for the floodplain where FEMA has or banks have. It's basically banks that do that and they refer back to FEMA. So I'd just like that question to be answered because I think that will be a big one because it's a jagged line throughout my neighborhood.
Yeah,
And
no, it's a great.
housing is varied from $15,000. There's, Bridgeton as well. I think Eric's probably with his daughter and maybe new grandbaby, but one of his were the costs that would go to different types of structures, condominiums that have been built in Bridgeton because they vary, some are brick, some are just hardboard, that kind of thing. So that would be important to know.
Thanks, Mary Helen. No, it's a great point. And so in our current arrangement with an accredited levy, generally almost everything behind the levee is a moderate flood hazard, but there's certain parts that are what's called shaded zone X, which is it's got flood risk that is really from rain events, overflow of ditches and other parts of the conveyance network. This analysis is presuming that the levee system itself is no longer accredited. It's still there, the levee is there, but it's unaccredited, which means for the insurance brokers, all of say Pen 2, if you look at the depth damage, basically the elevations, the flood depths would be 15 plus feet, right? And so everyone, your neighbor currently has a different zone. In this arrangement, everyone's homes will be considered a total loss. So it's a little bit more uniform. So this is what the reality of losing flood, the accreditation looks like as far as from the insurance broker side, not from the actual flood safety side. So I can probably provide some more images for this to help illustrate. We have some inundation maps and things like that could help. But more on this soon.
Yeah, that would be helpful because I am 16 feet above my neighbor across the street's property because it slopes up towards levee and out that levee road. So that would be helpful to see where that line is drawn.
Okay, well, yeah, definitely able to provide some more information. Okay, I'm gonna hand it over to Carrie. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll get my screen set here. Give me just a second. All right. Hi, everybody. Carrie Sandeman. I'm the Environmental Program Manager at MCDD. This short presentation is meant to describe and in some cases reiterate the way that we imagine the environmental and climate mandates being addressed through the budget forecast that's part of the operating revenue structure. Some of this is going to be going back over some themes that were brought up in the August program strategies presentation, and some of it is going to be new to you. There are pieces that don't necessarily have a specific budget line, but that are ways that we can see opportunities to achieving our new mandates through ways that we do our core functions in a different way. So not necessarily new costs, but new ways of doing our jobs. So first slide is the stuff that hopefully is pretty familiar to you, a big part of the plan for achieving our environmental mandates is through the watershed enhancement plan. This happens within the first 3 years. We've budgeted for the planning and also for the communications and community engagement around it. Another really big piece in the budget forecast that you'll see was scoped around the idea of restoring and revegetating channels in the conveyance system. The reason that this elevated is because it's something where we see a lot of overlap with the ability to enhance our flood safety services while providing environmental benefits. So when we are able to maintain or increase the conveyance capacity of a channel by adding benches, by pulling back banks, we also have the opportunity to add complexity in habitat and vegetation that improves landscape resilience, floodplain connection, climate resilience, water quality, fish and wildlife habitat. And then there's also a line in there about the maintenance and management of natural areas and green infrastructure. And the image I have on the bottom is from an informal planning exercise we did a few years back, but it's meant to represent the way that the watershed planning process gives us the chance to identify specific areas on the landscape where those opportunities for flood safety and environmental benefit overlap, and where we see opportunities to achieve our environmental mandates so that we can partner with the other jurisdictions where we have overlapping goals. Another piece that is specific really to the climate mandate that's in the budget forecast is for structural flood proofing. There's a couple ways you can go about that, which is the images on the slide here, really just for interest. But the idea is that in resilience planning and recognizing that we can't prepare for every event, we want to figure out how do we bounce back quickly, how do we protect our most critical assets? And those are things like drinking water and wastewater treatment plants, lift stations and pump stations. And so investing over time in flood proofing those assets is part of the approach to climate resiliency. Something that doesn't show up explicitly, but is in our assumptions about how we would achieve our environmental mandates are using new best management practices in the routine operations and maintenance that we already do. The image on the left here is meant to represent pollinator or grassland habitat opportunities we could have on our levees. It's something Marjorie Wolf mentioned when she was there speaking to y'all in June about them as transition habitats, as grassland habitats. We're looking at pollinator seed mixes right now even, and we do periodically regrade and reseed the levees. So we have chances to do more in that arena and enhance more habitat values on our levees within Army Corps standards. The middle image that's a coconut fiber fabric and a silt fence. These are actually required by permit, but the image is just meant to represent generally best management practices related to sediment and erosion. We are pretty good at them because we are in an area where we operate under a lot of state, federal, and local permits, but we can always get better, and we have a lot of peers around in the departments of transportation, environmental services, and others, Washington Department of Transportation, the county, where we can keep learning how to improve our ditch management practices and routine O&M best management practices. And then the last image on the right here is Colin and Randy standing near one of the pumps in Pump Station 1, and it's to trigger me to talk about opportunities we might have in related to pumping. So we pump water from the middle and upper slough for flood safety purposes, but in some cases we have flexibility about when and how much we do that, and we may have an opportunity to connect more to historical hydrology, to improve water quality through how and when we pump. So one example is that for many years now, on behalf of Bureau of Environmental Services, we do some additional pumping in the summer to bring in cold groundwater that supports fish and wildlife in the hot summer months. So those are a few examples in our routine O&M. We also have opportunities to grow our staff capacity and expertise around environmental, climate, and multi-benefit integrated projects. We have new positions in the budget in engineering and operations, so we can identify skill sets and focal areas for those new staff to grow our internal capacity and expertise. And that's also something that can and frankly already does happen when we rehire existing positions. So we'll be hiring for a facilities manager in the next month and a half or so, and we've already inserted some pieces about energy efficiency and climate resiliency for our headquarters in that position announcement. So we always have the opportunity to grow that internal capacity without additional cost. I think that our planning, I mean, I also lead the planning department, so I'm a bit biased here, but I think the way that we do planning has a lot of opportunity as well. Plans are places where we set goals and then figure out the strategies and activities to achieve them. And so, yes, watershed planning, absolutely, but also we do conveyance master planning, facilities planning. These are places where we can set a broader suite of goals that reflect our ORS 550 mandates and come out the other side with a suite of projects and recommendations that also reflect that wider suite of benefits. So the images on the side here came from the first conveyance master plan that we did that incorporated water quality and habitat. And you'll see on the top a restoration concept for the PIR pump station forebay, and on the bottom, a habitat structure that was conceived as an opportunity in the lower slope. And the last thing I want to mention is that I do recognize that no matter how many good and exciting ideas you come up with in your planning documents, you need to decide to give them the green light, fund them, make them happen. And that happens through the ways that the agency prioritizes. Annual budgeting is one, capital improvement planning processes are another. There are some capital project dollars in the operating budget for the revenue structure. And so there's opportunities, and we're starting to think about how do the criteria that we use to evaluate and select our projects, how can those better reflect and elevate the kinds of activities that provide flood safety benefits and also deliver fish and wildlife habitat, landscape resilience, climate mitigation and preparation. So I'll pause there. That was the real quick overview reiteration of some things you've seen both in the program presentation, but also in the budget. And we'll defer. I know we're a little behind time, but if there's questions or comments.
That was very helpful. Thank you, Carrie. And we are about 10 minutes behind, so we'll have to shave about 5 minutes off each of the last two presentations. We'll take a few questions. Nancy and then Shirley.
I think Shirley was first.
Shirley and then Nancy.
Well, I just want to throw this out. Of course, when I get the opportunity, I would hope with the new mitigation responsibilities that this agency will have, environmental effort it will be making, which is a little different than what the drainage districts have responsibilities have. I hope that one of your practices will be to begin to look at how do you increase floodplain capacity upstream and not have to do pump to the goal of doing less, reduce the amount of pumping that you have to do. So I just have to throw that out and plant that seed to have you ponder that.
Definitely. That's a great comment, Shirley. I want to recognize that there is some of that in the idea of the channel restoration and revegetation, adding some benches and some more, even if it's a smaller floodplain area, some more capacity. But the other place it shows up is in the project concepts we've identified for a capital bond, because some of those bigger floodplain storage, that would be with property acquisition and probably bigger capital dollars. But yes, absolutely. And keep bringing it up.
And I'll keep mine short as well. It's yeah, it's really good to hear this, Carrie. I feel like I'm in a completely different meeting than I was in like the last two meetings. So I've said before that there's a bunch of operational work that needs to happen to do these 4 mandates. They are, of course, all related to flood safety, and it will change the way that you do your work. And it will also change some of your capital projects. I guess I didn't see that reflected in the pie chart that we saw, and I'm concerned. Just now, I'm a little concerned. I'm getting 2 messages and I'm feeling some cognitive dissonance. So just going to lay that out there, and I know I will trust that we will understand this more as we go forward. But I definitely think the 100-year horizon, we might need code changes in our various cities, and that takes operational work, as well as how we manage the water and how we manage the banks and the floodplains, as Shirley said. So I'll leave it there.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, everybody. Let's move on to our next item, and Lori is back up to talk about the forecast review. Lori.
Thank you. I'm not able to share my screen.
And voila, you are now.
Thank you. All right, can y'all see my screen? Okay, I'll get started. Today we're going to take another look at the forecast for the urban district. I do want to note that we have not yet made any changes to the numbers in the forecast, but we are hearing you, and we know that there are questions about the level of administrative cost and FTEs, questions about the adequacy of the contingency number, and also concerns that the contingency number isn't necessary. Questions about the adequacy of spending on equity and cultural history, and also concerns that we're investing too much in these areas. Questions about whether we're investing enough in environmental work, and also concerns about too much spending in that area, to name a few. Today, we'll be reviewing some of the numbers and providing you some time to ask questions or give us some direction. I do want to point out that our goal is to find a total expenditure amount for the urban district that the board believes will provide the urban district with adequate funding for year one. This will inform your decisions on the revenue that you're faced with at this point in the process. The board will also be adopting a budget for year one when we get to that point. If we implement the new district in fiscal year 2024-2025, you'll be adopting the budget no later than June 30th, 2024. And we'll begin discussing the budget details and presenting the proposed budget in the spring of 2024. And prior to that time, what I would anticipate is that we'll have some sessions on budget priorities and where the board would want us to focus our spending in that year one budget. At that point, in the spring of 2024, you'll have a final review of the allocation of those budget dollars and the decision-making authority as to whether to adopt that budget. Just a quick overview of the things we'll be reviewing today. We'll start by addressing our switch to the review of year one spending, discuss the operating outcomes included in the year one forecast document that's in your packet, review the summary forecast, discuss changes in expenditures by type, and close with a review of revenue projections for year one. We'll have time for questions and discussion at the end of my presentation. So as you can see, we've changed our focus to year one of the urban district. Year one does have some impact of inflation that we'll be reviewing on an upcoming slide. After meeting with legal counsel in review of the process for developing the fee revenue ordinance, our outside counsel noted that it was best practice to anticipate a lower rate increase each year instead of trying to stabilize the rate for multiple years and then asking for a larger rate increase to catch up. Our focus on year five was driven by the goal of having a constant rate for the first several years, which is sort of in conflict with what we're hearing as best practice now. And it was also our effort to show district operations at a stabilized point because we know there'll be some transition costs and other things going on in those early years. By looking at year one, you should be better informed to define the total revenue dollars needed for the district in year one of operations, which in turn will allow you to make the revenue decisions you're faced with at this point. I do want to point out that year one is impacted by transition costs. We've received many questions from the board regarding the outcomes of the forecasted staffing and spending levels. Staff have included a draft version of this information in the year one forecast document starting on page 3 or page 38 of your board packet. In these 8 pages of the document, we've drafted a preliminary view of the outcomes that are contemplated in the forecast. We do want to emphasize that this is a work in progress and are seeking your input to better define the outcome definition and to ensure that we're taking the direction that you've envisioned. As you're aware, staff have worked over the past several months to pull together a draft 5-year operating forecast for the urban district. We started with the consolidated operating budgets for all of the districts, removing inter-district costs and revenues so that we didn't have any duplication in those revenues and expenses. We built the forecast from that consolidated budget, adding known service gaps such as record management, information technology support, equity management to implement our recently adopted equity plan, and additional staffing for emergency management were some of the areas we addressed. Additionally, we added estimates for the new service mandates of equity, cultural history, environment, and climate change. In the yellow, you can see the year 1 forecast for the urban district. As I mentioned, this forecast has not been changed and can be found on page 11 of the 5-year operating forecast document that's posted on the MCDD website. I will point out that the $3.4 million in costs projected for the direct billing of service fees leave $23.8 million in operating costs for year 1. As we've discussed earlier, particularly in Colin's session, we are really aware that the collection and billing costs are not a workable solution for the new district, and we're working really diligently with our local city partners to try to find a lower cost solution. Similar to the information we reviewed in relation to the year 5 forecast, your year 1 forecast document walks through the changes in dollars from our current consolidated budget for all districts and the year 1 forecast for the urban district. You can find details of that difference on page 12 of the year 1 forecast document, which is page 47 in your board packet. The total forecast for the current service levels is $21.9 million. So you can see that on the left. We're adding new, on the right-hand side. So you can see that that's equivalent to the consolidated budget current year of $20.2 million plus the inflation of $1.7 million. So that 20.2 plus 1.7 is the 21.9. On the right-hand side of that seesaw, you can see that we're trading the $6.3 million in major capital from the 22-23 budget with $2.5 million in capital and asset preservation costs, plus service gaps of $2.8 million and a contingency of $1 million. But in essence, that main part of the forecast is really equivalent to the current year budget plus the $1.7 million in inflation. To the current services of $21.9 million, we're adding new support services of $0.7 million, new responsibilities for equity, environment, and cultural history of $0.7 million, and transition costs of $0.5 million. This adds to $23.8 million in operating costs. And then we're adding that $3.4 million in billing and collection fees for total expenditures of $27.2 million for year 1. This slide is a refresher of the new costs being added to the forecast in addition to the current 22-23 budget. In service gaps, we have 9 FTEs. Support for records management, information technology, an equity manager. In planning, there's a full-time emergency manager and a project manager to cover the PMLS projects until we receive the GEO-bond funding. A paralegal to support transition documentation needs for the urban district, 1 FTE in engineering, and 1 FTE in operations. These position adds proposed to fill gaps are a direct result of the lack of adequate investment in administration under the existing district structure, in addition to transition needs and the growth of capital programs. New services in year 1 include a grant manager and 1 FTE in operations. We also have some additional funding for communications and planning, to address expected increases in billing questions, customer service needs, and the need for significant public engagement related to the design process for the PMLS project and other capital projects. For our new mandates, we have a procurement equity FTE, startup funding for the cultural history program, and $400,000 for operational costs for environmental and climate change initiatives. The remainder of environmental investments are in the capital plan outside of the operating budget. This chart shows a breakdown of the year one operating costs for the urban district. The new mandate of equity shows two positions, an equity manager and a procurement equity position. The remainder of the equity work for the district is throughout the operations, and it's difficult to segregate those numbers. Environmental and climate change costs reflect the operating expense portion of those costs, that piece that Carrie shared with us today, with further investments in this area being considered as part of our capital planning. Cultural history dollars are reflective of the startup of this program, with increases in funding for this area occurring in later years of the forecast, once the future board adopts a more comprehensive program. Let's move on to the revenue projections for year one. The issue that we've identified as we formalize the forecast is that direct billing of fees is not an effective way to collect revenues. We've been advised that a direct fee billing would have similar collection rates to the arts tax, and are forecasting the assumption in year one that we would only be 60% collectible, with collection rates increasing each year, but peaking at about 80%. As you can see, that 60% collection rate leaves over $18 million on the table in order to collect enough to cover the costs. This clearly isn't a good approach for our ratepayers, costing them significantly more than projected operating costs just to collect our fees. As you can see here, if you add the collectability cost of $18.2 million to the collections and customer service costs of $3.4 million, the total cost of billing the fee directly is $21.6 million, which is almost equal to our forecasted operating cost of $23.8 million. We are working to find a better path for our community members and businesses in the district, because clearly it does not make sense to spend $21.6 million to cover $23.8 million in cost. And with that, I am going to hand things over to Sarah O'Brien for discussion.
Friends, I just told Lori I would help direct traffic here today so that Steve can focus on chairing and Lori can focus on content and you all can focus on questions and discussion. And Lori, thanks for a very clear and responsive presentation. Do we have questions, comments, discussion items folks want to dig in with? Mary Helen and then Steve, I think. Oh, Mary Helen and then Seth and then Steve. Was that a hand? Yeah, okay. Mary Helen.
I don't know if this is the place to ask this question, but in Lori's presentation, she kept saying, we are spending and we haven't decided if we're going to spend those amounts. And that I understand. I mean, we've not agreed that, and I have been a long time proponent of equity and cultural history, but to spend $500,000 on positions that already exist in the public sector that can be utilized seems, so I don't know at what point to ask this question. These are just, is this just a wish list of what we want to spend money on, and then it's up to the budget committee to make recommendations or the executive board to approve those expenditures?
Lori, I suspect some of that was just shorthand, right? You can only say we're proposing so many times or we're estimating so many times, but do you want to help us clarify where we're at here?
Sure, Mary Helen, that's a great question. This is all a forecast. And as I said at the very, very beginning, I think there's a lot of different visions on the board as to what direction and how much we should be spending in each category. And really, my goal here is to help assist the board members to see some numbers and start to create what I call the box, which is how much money do we need to be able to have in revenue in that year one to be able to operate the urban district. So all of these things that are in a forecast are what staff has developed, and there were many, many hands in that process to really estimate what do we think it's going to take to be able to provide the services that are listed in those 8 pages in the document. Like, here's our vision, here's what we think we're supposed to be doing, but we really need your direction, and I need some direction here, because I want to be able to provide the board members with the information they need to make their decision. I think that we're not, what I'm seeing is I've got 17 people that probably have 17 different ideas as to where we should be focusing our spending. And we want to be able to get you to the point where you can agree on the box, like how much money do we need in that first year? So part of that, I think, is going to be taking a look at, we know that you have a very solid hand in that budget process. And so that money can be allocated during that budget process. But right now we need to figure out, what do we think the total should be? So when I say spending, I'm trying to at least make my presentation a little bit interesting, but it is all a forecast. It is not a budget. It is not official. It is subject to change, but I need some clear direction from our board so that I can come back in our next round with some information that'll help you with your decision making. And I'm feeling a little bit unbalanced at this point, because I'm getting some very differing recommendations depending on who it is. So that's a really long answer to your question, but no, this is a forecast, and it's really up to you all to give me some direction so that I can provide you what you need.
There's one clarification I'd like to make, which is that we are spending 20.9 million in the current fiscal year. That is what the combined budgets are. And we built from that to get us to the 23 point, whatever it is, I don't have it memorized, in year one of the urban. So we are spending 20.9 million collectively this year.
Yes, that's correct.
So can I just put it in kind of my terms, or how I would, this is what you want to spend the money on, and it'll be up to the board to decide if it should be spent on the items that you've identified as important.
That's correct. And really that official kind of prioritization will happen in that year one budget. So.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify in my mind at which point we'd have that discussion on spending.
Mary Helen, just to clarify a little bit on behalf of the Echo Northwest team too, part of this is a response to Echo Northwest's request that the staff provide this kind of like big picture cost estimation in order for them to be able to do the revenue analysis work that they've been doing. And so it is a planning tool for the Echo team to be able to come back to you with revenue options, and they need to know, a ballpark estimate of which direction, what flavors of money can go in different directions. So it is a tool for them to be able to move forward with their analysis work. And as Lori said, not a budget or a spending authorization or anything
So
else.
maybe this is flippant and I might get in trouble for saying this, but it's a wish list of what we want to spend money on to do the things we want to do.
I don't know that I would call a forecast a wish list, but I think you can put it in whatever terms you would like.
What the Echo team asked the staff for was an estimate of what would be needed to fulfill the mandate based on their best professional judgment, subject to the advice of the board and the ways that Lori described, right? Seth?
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe ask the question of how are we going to go about, you said you have these different opinions or prioritizations. What is the mechanism we're going to use to arrive at a decision on that box? Is that conversation we're having at this meeting? Is that part of the technical advisory board, or is that coming as part of the budget committee meeting?
I think it's kind of all three, Seth. So the technical advisory committee, we're having that meeting next week. We're going to have them take a look at the forecast, look at the assumptions in the forecast, and really give us some feedback that we can bring back to you so that you can hear what recommendations or thumbs up or thumbs down we get from them as far as how we've pulled the numbers together. The forecasting process in my mind, as I've described, is really coming to that box. And that really is going to be driven by you as the board members. Like, how do we get Lori to provide us with the right information so that we know we have the right number to be able to make a decision on the revenue? And then step 3 is you all have the ultimate authority and control over that box of money when we come into the year 1 budget process. And in fact, we just talked about the budget process. You all have your hands in the budget process even right now as we move into January. You're starting into the budget process for the upcoming year for this organization. So no different than what we will be doing in year 1 of full operations. You will have the final authority and say on the allocation of those sources of funds when we get to that point. So it's kind of a combination. I'm just feeling like there's a lot of kind of different directions that we're going right now. And I really want to be able to help y'all get to the point where we come to that number. And there definitely will need to be further work and discussion on allocation of that number as we move into the budget process.
So just to clarify, Lori, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jim.
More broadly, Seth, we've given you first drafts of the guiding principles of the project program descriptions and the forecast. And we're going to spend the next couple of months listening to you guys give us feedback on those first drafts. And then we're going to revise those based on what we're hearing. And we're hoping that by listening to you, we're going to land in a place where there's a solid, rock solid, large majority of you who feel a lot more comfortable with what the final documents and forecasts say. But we have to work through all that.
And so just as a follow-up to that, you know, we're being involved in the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District budget, but it seems like most of the money and operations happens at the 4 existing districts, which have added a significant number of staff over the last 5 years. But in order to understand that, I went back to try and look at the budget process for MCDD to look at how positions were added and what the business case was for what the need was. And I can't find any documentation about, you know, we added these positions and this is why, and this is the service outcome that's attached to them, and here's why we need this position. It just kind of was a number, and the number went up every year. And if we're talking about reviewing kind of what the year 1 budget is for the new district, I don't know, we would either need to start from 0 and do kind of a 0-based budget, or I would need to understand more of how the decisions on current staffing levels were made and what service outcomes were there, so that then we could add on these current service gaps and new core services. There's a missing piece here where I don't know where we would do that analysis or get that information unless we went and started.
We provided that information a couple meetings ago when Reed came in and talked about the history of the staffing for the districts and walked through how some of those decisions were made and where we kind of started with staff and how we've ended at where we're at. So we can pull that information. I can't recall, Seth, if you were there at that meeting when Reed spoke about the history of the organization and kind of where we were at the beginning and what our strategy was for adding positions. We do have MCDD, we have some crossover on this board with each of our individual district boards as well. So that's part of the process as well.
Maybe, Seth, it would be worthwhile for us to continue to think about the narrative. We have this sort of bad first draft outcomes thing that we provided in your packet today. Maybe it would be worthwhile for us to document each FTE and what their role is and some of that for the board. I suspect other board members might be interested in the full head count and what people do. That's something we could think about.
That would be great, Jim. Thanks.
So Seth, I want to pitch in with one more thing too. In the last meeting, I shared a little metaphor about playing tug of war versus weaving a cloth together. And you all have been asking some good and important questions and providing feedback that then you have some delay to come back to in January, right? And we need to decide on sort of facilitation approach and structure for that discussion. And what I encouraged you to think about in the last meeting and to start practicing is you can play tug of war with the staff going in two directions, or you can talk to each other where there's points of disagreement. And we can, do our very best to help facilitate that and make it easier to have those discussions in the meetings. Once we get through December and early January meeting, we'll have feedback from the technical advisory group. We'll have a clearer discussion of mandate in the executive session. And we'll have, I believe, some updated information and proposed changes from the Echo Northwest team on the revenue model too. And so that's, you're going through a sequence of meetings that requires you to wait quite a while to get to those discussions. But that is where we're headed, is to bring those pieces of information back to this board and have a facilitated discussion that helps you work towards resolution when there are conflicts of values or interests here that need to be resolved in order for you to give the staff direction.
So I want to clarify the expectation is that we'll have a chance to talk about that in January to then provide staff the information that they need for the financial forecast, is what I heard you say.
That's my understanding. I want to double check with Jim, even though I saw him nod, I think.
It might take a little longer, Seth, to get through all the information we're going to want to get from you all. Is the only hesitation I have. It will definitely happen in January. It might need to happen in February too. So there's a lot of
But that
material to go.
conversation is still coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just a
Absolutely.
reminder that the same person that's working on the forecast document also works on the budget document, and we're moving into budget season. So there's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah.
Thanks. Steve, you're next.
Thanks.
Chair.
I'll make a few comments and then pass it on, but I think we have a significant challenge standing up this new revenue, making some properties pay a lot more than they're currently paying, having some properties that aren't paying anything right now pay into this. That's our significant challenge, getting that stood up. And when I look at, and thank you, Lori, this is very helpful. I think it's really transparent. It helps clarify some things. But when I look at service gaps, for example, I think of level of service. I think of filling, and I'm coming from the perspective of I help budget for and manage 3 water utilities, a transportation system. All of these things are similar. But I think of all of the service gaps, and if I were to fill my service gaps, what that equates to is a level of service increase. It should. And I guess what I'm struggling with is that always points back to what are people willing to pay for? So are people willing to pay for your current level of service, or are they willing to pay for more? And filling service gaps, and I get why you guys are asking. I totally get it. If I was in your position, I'd ask for the same thing. But again, the challenge back to standing that new revenue up, and should it be kind of at that level now or at that level later? I'm really struggling with the what feels like 0 to 60, and as opposed to 0 to 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60. Yeah, I have a hard time jumping to filling all of the level of service gaps now when we have such a significant challenge standing that revenue up today. I'll just leave it at that.
Steve, can I ask real quick whether the outcomes language in Lori's document from this time helped at all with that? Because I think I've been hearing with, no, that's not the target that you're looking for there.
And it's nothing against what Lori put together, or I get it, but it doesn't help. It doesn't help me. I mean, I know what the outcomes that you're desiring are, but that doesn't help me answer the question, can we get there with current staffing levels with a little bit longer effort, keeping level of service down to where people want to pay for that level of service? Or is the only way to get there increasing level of service, increasing budget? I think you can still get to those outcomes. There's a lot of gray area that says, how do I determine as a board member whether you can do it or not? It's difficult to ascertain, yes. But I also hear Seth and what he's saying. There has been over the years service gaps that have been filled, and I think the board needs an understanding of what those positions, what those differences in materials and services are able to achieve long-term versus what you're proposing here immediately in year one.
Jim, can you help us a little bit with how your executive team's been talking through that? Because I think that there's an analytical portion to that, but I think there's a fundamental sort of identifying the staffing gaps and whether and how to fill, when to fill those gaps that I think you're probably in a better position to answer.
I mean, I think this is the fundamental policy question the board needs to wrestle with. I met with the chair of MCDD and our attorney yesterday over lunch, where the attorney was expressing deep, deep concerns about our inability to manage legal and other risks because of the lack of investment. The reason we're all here today is because the legacy districts don't have the capacity and have not kept up with the investments needed to maintain our system. So there's a gap. And we need to fill that gap, and we need to do some new stuff. The ramp up is really up to you guys. What your staff has proposed is a fairly robust set of investments that we believe are necessary. Do we need all of them at once? Is going to be a determination you all are going to need to make, and we're happy to help you determine what trade-offs result from different decision making. But there's a big gap, and I think the things that we've received from the investments that have grown the existing MCDD organization are authorization by Congress and WRDA, millions of dollars in grants from the state of Oregon to advance this work, a line of credit from the city of Portland to stand up this whole operation. We've been wildly successful in advancing a really comprehensive solution to a really big problem. That's what you've gotten from these dollars. We need to continue that level of investment as we move through the transition and build a really expensive $250 million capital program and implement it across multiple jurisdictions in a really complex regulatory environment. That's what you're getting. And if we don't do these things, you're going to end up with very expensive zoning changes and flood insurance that people aren't going to be able to afford. We're doing our best to give you transparent information about what we think the real costs are to pull this off. You're ultimately the decision makers. I don't know whether that answers it. I'm sorry if I'm on my soapbox.
Steve, I'm going to ask us to move forward in taking questions from your colleagues. And just to remind us that Lori said at the beginning, this new information is an effort to focus on year one at your request. It does not incorporate the sort of push-pull, up-down conversation that we had last time we discussed
and I'm really committed, you guys.
So it's recognized, that's well recorded, the staff are working with it, but we're going to the tag next to get some advice on
And we
that.
really want to hear all this from you, because I think on the basis of what we're hearing from you, we're going to bring you back something new and different, right? That's going to be reflective of what you're telling us. But we can't do that every week. We need to listen more to hear from more of you to get a better idea of where we're going to land. And we're going to bring you a different proposal. I suspect that's going to be a couple of months before you see it, because we have a lot of talking with you all to do to narrow these gaps. Okay.
Nancy.
Yeah, I know, okay, so this is not going to be a soapbox. This is going to be a little bit of context. I know some people are new, some people have been around a really long time. I'm one of those people that's been around a really long time, and I've watched the district. So I know the 3 districts, Penn 1, Penn 2, MCD, because I'm in the city of Portland. I don't know SDIC as well. So I'm not speaking so much to you all, but I am talking about the MCDD staff, and I really appreciate what I've been hearing in terms of caution about FTEs and stuff. We always have to be careful of that in public agencies, but I just want the staff to know, especially the ones that are here, that those of us who have worked with you in the past, we understand how hardworking you are, that crazy things you have done to provide level of service with almost no resources over many years. And then I think Jim said it really well, that the build up in resources over the past 5 or 6 years, however long it's been, has really taken the district from a very bare bones, like we can protect these agricultural fields, and we can even go beyond that by like driving crazy instruments on barges in the water, and the barges going like this, and thank God nobody fell out, right? So it's gone from that to a really well-run machine that's been able to continue operating, and at the same time develop the materials to leverage a lot of funding as well as legislative wins. So I would say that that Jim, I thought you said that success really well, like let's not forget with this sort of dire straits we find ourselves in terms of collecting money, let's not forget how far we've come. And I also understand that as we turn into a new single district, that there is some synergies. I mean, the staff is the staff, but there's still some synergies, not a lot of billing back and forth and all that stuff. And there's new mandates. And as Jim keeps telling us, we're already not collecting as much as we need to do to keep it operating. So we are getting to all those things, but I just wanted to provide some context, especially for people who haven't been here as long. As I've watched the district grow, I've seen it become more successful in terms of facing super big challenges and actually getting super big wins. So I just want to say that.
Thanks, Nancy. Helpful context. James.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Thanks for the presentation, Lori. I'm going to unfortunately reiterate much of what Nancy said, but I need to say it from my perspective. So I think I have two comments of question. The first comment is, after close to 7 years on the Penn One board, I have I've seen sort of a paradox. One half of the paradox is that the staff do amazing work. The other side of that is they don't really have the resources to get to it. The good work that the staff did on the Penn One Drainage Master Plan is a great example. That had to really be we had to wait for city funding, and then we had funding for a while, and it needed to be assigned to someone on the staff, and it took a while to get it done. It was a 10 out of 10 product, but the staff weren't initially available. We have funding for the PIR pump station, and I don't think the staff are really available to work on that yet. I know when they do, it'll be the best possible work. And so I am saying that the staff do excellent work and there's excellent leadership. I don't have a complaint there, but I recognize that we don't have the resources. When you look at these 4 independent districts, it's no longer I shouldn't say it's no longer an issue of funding, but I don't think we can spend the money we have at times. And that's really important for people to recognize. I also worry about staff burnout when as we transition through this effort and we move into the Corps of Engineers projects. I worry about staff burnout. I don't think we have adequate staff to manage what we're doing, and we have to deliver a lot more in the future. And so the last part of that comment is I would just ask you to put on your independent drainage district hat and look at what your district is trying to accomplish and how well is that working in the current model. I know in Penn One, we need to bring more resources, and we need more resources to deliver specific projects. Second comment is in general regarding the proposal. I think the proposal is a good one. I think it is a good proposal, and I think we need to start shifting our attention to looking at the equity of who pays what. And we need to find a way to lower the costs of collection. But I would like to see us start moving strategically in that direction. That is the nut to crack, I think. So I'm supportive of the proposal. It's high level concept, and that's our job, in my opinion, at this time. So I'm supportive of that. My last question, I don't need an answer now. I apologize if I'm confused, but I do think, I think I recall that the 20 million, 21 million that we're spending this year or next, that includes some substantial capital improvements, 5 to 7 million. So we might be talking a little bit about apples and oranges because the future budget, most of the capital work is going to be deferred to the GEO bond, I believe. So I just want to make sure, and I can take that answer offline, but I think that's something I'm a little bit hung up on now.
It's on that seesaw page where you'll see kind of our trades, and that's true. There's a little bit of capital trade there, but then there's some operating costs added in there. So that is correct, James.
Great, thanks for pointing that out.
James, before we go to Corky, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to let you know that Jamie Damon and I have connected, and she can make do with about 20 minutes in the last segment here. And also I'm in DC and I've got somebody laying on a horn outside my window. So I apologize if you can hear that. It's been going on for about 3 minutes now. So if anybody else has a comment or question, please do put your hand up so we can get you in the queue. And otherwise, I think we can transition in the next 3 or 4 minutes here. Corky.
I'll try to be fast, but I do want to point out that there's a risk here that we end up concluding that there's no option but to spend $21 million in order to collect $23 million of operating expenses. And Lori's right, that's not acceptable. But I can see myself doing it too. I think every one of us could end up saying, well, what else can we do? And so we go down that path. My urge is to let's not go down that path, because as Lori said, that's nuts. We can't do that. And if we did, imagine what's going to happen if that's on the Oregonian headlines. You know, the GO bond goes down, you know, and any new fees probably go down too. You know, that'll kill it. So it's not, we have to come up with something different. I don't know what it is. I like Seth's concept of, you know, let's kind of get back to the basics. You mentioned zero-based budgeting. I kind of doubt that that's the solution here, because then what happens is you end up spending $21 million in order to collect 22 million instead of 23 million. You know, I mean, it's like, I'm not sure, but conceptually, the you know, big high level, Seth's right. Let's step back. This is not going to work as it is. We've got to come up with something else. And so I'm just want to encourage everybody to perhaps think along those lines. Lori's also right. We only have so many hours of the day. So the review of staffing, I suggest, you know, if we're going to do that, let's cut to the chase and do it as quickly as possible. I would like one quick question from Lori is sometime in the future. I'd love to see the trend of costs of, and I could probably dig this up myself, but maybe you can do it faster and easier. The trend of O&M costs, operating maintenance costs, not all the other stuff, not management, not all, you know, Levy Ready Columbia, just our O&M. How has that trended over the past 20 years? You know, pick your years, whatever, you know, how's that trended and what's the trend going forward? That would help inform a little bit of this. Thanks.
And that you want, so just on the operations and maintenance side, both staffing and materials and services?
The stuff that gets to the core of our mission, which is moving water.
We will do our best. It's an interesting question because historically the district has not tracked costs by department, but we'll do our best to try to
If
pull
it's
that
not practical, then
information
don't do it. I didn't mean to burden you with something that's not practical.
No, it's okay. I think it's a good question. And
it's one of the service gaps we're trying to fill.
I want to say I appreciate all the board members' feedback today too. This has been a great discussion.
Thanks.
You've been
And
great.
to Corky's first point too, no matter how many times we say that we need another revenue collection solution, we all want to say it one more time because it's so clear. And I just want to share with folks again, I see the staff working so hard on this. And so I appreciate the need to say it again, but I really want to let
comments
folks
are
know
not,
that behind the scenes, they are working really hard on this issue.
Please don't think I was going in that direction. That's not my point. You know,
Sure.
so, yeah.
I keep wanting to say it too, and I'm the facilitator. It is a temptation. Tanny, I'm going to give you the last word.
I'm going to agree with a lot of what Corky just said. I think one of the things we really need to look at is the revenue collection piece. I think that's really kind of a black eye for all of us if that ends up being a direction that we go. And, you know, I don't know that we're there yet with staff, but I do know that like we were probably running on baling wire and tape and things like that. But we did have like 17 FTE in 2017-18. And then like last year, I think we were at 36 and now we're going to 50. So there are improvements being made as far as trying to get things staffed. I think we're trying to work that direction. But with all that said, we've really got to look at what people are paying today and what they're going to be paying tomorrow and how that's going to work. Because for me, I know at the end of the day, it's going to be what people can afford. And that's going to really change things, because if they balk at the fee heavily, how are we going to pass a bond? And I think that's something, you know, we all have to keep in the back of our mind is how do we get this where we want it to go without it kind of imploding on us through the process? And so that's one of the reasons I'm asking to see how this is going to affect some properties as far as what they're paying today and what they're paying tomorrow. Because we've got to make sure that we're creating value for those people. Or then when the bond comes, they're like, well, I'm already paying this, I'm not paying that too. And that's, you know, one of the things I do not want to see happen at the end of the day. Thanks.
Thanks, Tanny. And that's one where I can make a clear commitment that is the plan is for the Echo Northwest team to come back with a set of revised both analysis for the next round and revenue approach to incorporate some of their, a set of proposed revisions to incorporate some of the feedback you provided last time. So they're moving forward in parallel. Mr. Chair, are we ready to switch to our final topic here? I think Jamie Damon from Kearns and West is ready to lead us through that conversation when you're ready to shift gears here.
That sounds great. And I apologize, the lighting in my office is doing funky things. I'm not in the witness protection program. It just, for some reason,
You're
isn't
trying to
highlighting like
retain
this.
anonymity for the rest of the
I
conversation.
need one of those circle light thingies that some people have, but yes, let's move on. And Jamie.
Great. Thank you, everybody. So here I am, Jamie Damon. This has been a really great conversation that you all have been, that I was able to listen to. Let me share my screen here. There we go. So I'm here to give you an update about what your communications and outreach and engagement folks have been working on. I've got a handful of slides to walk this through. For some of you, I've already shared some of these concepts with some of you in the individual interviews that I've been doing, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through the individual interviews of all the board members. I look forward to meeting with the rest of you, and those conversations have really helped to inform and shape and really do like a gut check of, are we on the right track and are we matching up with expectations with what you're thinking about? So let me go ahead and go to the next slide here. And for those of you I haven't met, I'm Jamie Damon with Kearns and West, and working with your communications team. You can see across the bottom of the slide here, these are the folks that you've got on board to help you with your communications and outreach around the GeoBond. So I put together a little mini agenda of the things that I wanted to chat with you about today. I want to start with a reminder of what we're doing and why, and where we are in the overall calendar and scheme of things. I know that you've all had your heads down, focused on the operating revenue pieces. And so now it's time to kind of lift your head up a bit and think about the GeoBond. I have a strategy overview for you to just give you an idea of what is involved in the coming year with regard to communication and outreach. And then we've got a initiative logo recommendation. That's the fun thing. I left that towards the end. And then just a few next steps. So just a reminder of what we are doing and why. So the primary goal for this coming year for communications and outreach and engagement around the GeoBond is to build support for your general obligation bond. That's the bottom line. The key objectives are to build a base of understanding with the public about the work of the districts, share information about flood risk and solutions, and engage what I'm calling a small but mighty coalition to add to your capacity and support the GeoBond. So you've probably seen this slide before, this is sort of all a high level overview of all the work that you're engaged with. And the blue is the operating revenue, the green is the GeoBond development process, and the purple is the dissolution conversation. So you can see at the GeoBond development process, we're relatively in the beginning. So we want to give you a heads up about what's to come. And we recognize that this is nested within the operating revenue conversations that you're having. But really just in a large scale picture, what we're looking at is beginning in January of 2023 at your discretion, we want to start engaging and informing your community about some key messages about who you are, about the work, about the need to build that base of support. And to also inform your decision around what the package looks like for your referral in the fall of 2023. And once you refer, then you move into what's called the campaign mode of the bond. And then that brings us to hopeful on the May election and a successful passage. So that's just high level, the big chunks of work. So this from January to the fall of 2023, it's really about building that base of understanding of the public and of partners around what the GeoBond, what the need is and what the work is that's coming forward. So in putting together a right size, I keep using that term, a right size approach for the communications and outreach. We've done some polling, we've had several focus groups, and there's some things that we found that are challenging. And one of them is that people don't know who you are. They don't know these districts exist. They don't know what you do. They're not necessarily even aware that there's a levee. They don't know how the Columbia River stays where it is, but they're glad it does. And there's a huge, big information gap, a knowledge gap there. Some of the other challenges are, you've got multiple entities advancing the work and you're merging into the one, but it's difficult to talk about. It's difficult to talk about, Penn 1, Penn 2, SDIC, MCDD, the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District, Levee Rated Columbia. There's just a lot of entities pulling together to make this happen. There's been limited involvement from BIPOC and environmental justice organizations, and you need their support moving forward. It's very complicated and very technical work, as you all know, taking the deep dive that you have around the operating revenue conversations. And so it's difficult to explain. And then there's just this general distrust of government, and people don't like taxes. They don't like to have to pay fees and taxes. They don't want more. Some of the opportunities are, you have this strong continued support of key institutions, many of them who are investors and board members, that your peers right here. You've got, you are moving towards this consolidated larger district, more revenue for the system, more ability to meet your needs. You've got a broader mandate that attracts new and diverse stakeholders, so you're going to be able to build out your capacity. And there's an opportunity for greater awareness of your work, of the infrastructure and the flood risk, which will really help all of you as you implement projects moving forward. So we took all that information in, and then we developed these three components of the engagement work moving forward. And so the three components are, and they're not necessarily in order because they're concurrent. Public outreach and information, so developing and distributing of information and opportunities for outreach and education. That's number one. Number two is building a coalition. That's that small but mighty group of folks that can understand and support the work that you need to do moving forward, not just to pass the GeoBond, but also in your implementation of projects and in your work as a district. And three, developing and refining the GeoBond. By and large, the majority of the GeoBond has been, is defined based on the work that you've already done around the Corps of Engineers project, around the FEMA accreditation projects, with the assets and liabilities work that you've already engaged in, with your CIP identification. You have a good sense of what the majority of that package is. There's a few places where you need some help around environment, around cultural history. How do you right size that? How do you integrate that with your project work? What does that look like? And how can we bring in some folks to work with you to help advise you around when you make your decision about what this package looks like. And so what this looks like, I hesitated to put it on another schedule because I know that you've seen a lot of schedules. And so, but I just want to give you an idea of what's happening when. So the public outreach and information, that happens all the way through 2023 into 2024. We're proposing regular e-newsletters. We have got a database that we've already built. We're proposing a series of webinar town hall meetings that are focused on different topics that are recorded so that people can go back and review them, but that have a town hall element so that folks can raise their hand, they can ask questions, and they can be engaged that way. There's the building of the coalition. That's that small but mighty group and we want to do that through some targeted outreach with partner organizations, with cultural community leaders, and to establish what we're calling a panel of advisors. what happens in a lot of these bond measure developments is there's a community advisory committee that's put in place that helps to look at the package of projects and refine the bond, you know, to make a recommendation to all of you as the decision makers about what that looks like moving forward. You're a 17-member board. Often the, you know, the folks that are making the decision, you know, they're 3 electeds or 5 electeds. It's a much smaller group. And so in many ways, your board is representative of much of the community, but there are some gaps. And so rather than standing up a whole nother advisory committee, we're proposing identifying what we're calling a panel of advisors. And it's really common in campaigns or in bonds that you have sort of this kitchen table group of people, you know, that are like, hey, you know, here's what we've heard from polling or from surveys or from these town halls that we have, and you know, and then they help to synthesize that and help you bring back recommendations to your board. And then we're also suggesting that you identify a couple of board liaisons. You know, one of the things that we've noticed in, and you've seen this too, a dynamic on your board is, you know, you're a 17-member board, but when you set up a subcommittee, everybody wants to be on the, on the subcommittee. And so having a couple of people who can be nimble and work with that panel of advisors as a liaison back to the board to bring back information to all of you, I think is a good approach, and we could talk about that further. And then there's developing and refining the GeoBond. And so that's your job. You know, that's informed by public outreach and the targeted engagement. It's synthesized by the panel of advisors and the board liaisons. And that's, you know, so when we do this back and forth with the broader community to help to refine and focus, you know, that we're bringing that back to all of you, and you're integrating that in your thinking about what the right package should be. So I have just a couple other slides that I want to share with you. I said this is kind of the fun one. Often as in an initiative, you have a, you know, you need to have a logo, a name. There's something that people can gravitate to, and we have all of this alphabet soup of all these entities that are advancing this work. You know, we can't say, you know, we're working on flood safety with the urban flood safety, water quality, all these districts. We need something that's more succinct and simple. And we're branding the work, you know, not the agency. You haven't stood up the agency quite yet. And so it could be a way to step into a new brand for the new district. But we're not quite there yet to brand that, but we're branding the work. And building on the current entity's identity. So trying to pull in, you know, what we know people understand about the current districts into the name for the new initiative. What we found in the polling and in the focus groups is that there's a very low awareness of flood risk. When people think of climate change or extreme weather events, they think about fire, they think about drought, they don't think about flood. And when they think about flood, when we connect the dots for them, they think about the Willamette, Johnson Creek, sort of everything but the Columbia. And I think that's in large part due to the fact that you have done a good job. You know, for the 100+ years that these districts have been in place, you have managed that flood risk, and now you need some help. And so, you know, we want to connect climate concern and flood risk in people's mind and put that front and center. And it's got to be simple and clear. So here's where we landed. And we have tested this with focus groups. We had a couple of different options. People really resonated with this one. They liked you know, it just made a lot of sense. We put flood safe right up top. And Columbia River is the geographic pin, so people know what we're talking about. And protecting communities is primary of what your goal is. And improving the natural environment in a changing climate is recognizing the natural systems that this is a part of. So this is what we're proposing moving forward with. The executive team, we initially had it as Flood Safe Columbia. The executive team added River because they wanted to make sure to really hit that home. And our public opinion polling firm that we have on board really strongly suggested that we have flood be right up front in people's minds, so that if all they see is this, they're thinking, oh, right, flood, you know, flood safety, that's paramount and that's important. That's what we're trying to do here. So I got one more slide for you. So just a couple of immediate next steps. Like I said, I'm about 2/3 the way through the one-on-one interviews. They've been fantastic. Thank you for everybody for your time. We're going to be developing the Flood Safe Columbia River a website and initial materials so that we can begin to launch the information engagement strategy, hopefully in January of 2023. And you'll be seeing me. I'll be coming back and giving you, more detail. We can have more conversation, and those are the next steps. So the next slide is questions and discussion, and I'm just going to stop sharing, and so I can see y'all. I think we've got 8 minutes. So what y'all think? Stunned silence.
I'll unmute myself.
Well, I won't take, I'll just start speaking.
Sure.
The logo, the concept is good about flood safe, but my first reaction was pick your disaster. You got earthquakes, you got fire, you got floods, all those kinds of things. And so it's, I don't know, and that's because I've never seen it and I didn't have any reaction, but it's like I don't know how to say this, and I sometimes don't say things correctly, but it's like we're trying to scare people. I mean, and not that fire and earthquakes and hurricanes or there's not much anybody can do to make it hurricane safe. But that was my initial reaction, and there wasn't a why should I care element to it. So but I like the graphics, I like the overall concept, and it's hard for me to comment on it because I've been knee deep in the weeds or head deep in the weeds for so long that I wouldn't. So if we could get reactions from people that have no idea that there's a levy and what does this mean to, well, Evan, you look like you're ready to say.
Yeah, I was gonna encourage Jamie and the group to maybe focus in on the strategy a little bit. We did polling and focus group testing to get to this place. And we started from the assumption that we were going to use Levy Ready Columbia, the name, the brand, the website. And what we discovered in doing research and talking to people that had absolutely no idea what we were talking about was nobody knows what a levy is.
Right.
So that doesn't really help us when we're trying to connect them to an issue. And as we did more work and research and conversations with public, it just became clear that the flooding needed to be the thing that was front and center. I think the point of Jamie's presentation, and I'm sorry if it got sort of hidden in the sharing of that initiative and logo at the back end, was you all have your head down and tucked into this operating revenue work, and it is so important, and you need to focus on it. We also need to move a bond package together in the next year, and so we're trying to come up with a strategy and an approach that is right size. Jamie used that term a few times, that recognizes the shape and size of this board, where there's some gaps, and gets us to a place where we are starting to address that concern that Councilor Craddock keeps bringing up around, how are we going to raise money for this thing? How are we going to fund the campaign? And so what we've really been thinking about is, you're a 17-member board, but 12 of you are representatives of public agencies that will not be able to raise money and work on the campaign. And so how do we build out our coalition so that we have more entities that are engaged here that can help do this work? And so we really do want input. We thought we were going to have a little bit more time today, but you guys were having really important discussions. So in January, if we can continue to talk about this and really have you think about the strategy and what seems right to you to have a conversation with the public about the bond measure, knowing that we've done so much work already to get to a point, and we have a little bit more to go in order to be able to refer something.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks, Mary Ann. I just want to remind folks, just so I can keep kind of us pointed in the right order, just meeting decorum, please. If you have something to say, please raise your hand first and I will call on you. just appreciate that. We only have 4 more minutes, and I just want to make sure people have an opportunity, and I keep order. Mary Helen, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
The other point I wanted to ask is if you can put in there somewhere the exact, what Evan said, 12 members can't help raise the money. So that leaves it to 5 of us to do that, and how that's gonna work and our time commitments as well. So, and how
Yeah.
you using that.
Yeah, and so one of the things, Mary Helen, that we've talked about, and you and I talked about this in our one-on-one meeting that we had, is that, there's some training and education pieces to bring to the board about, what your role is and what this looks like over the next year and a half, and what kind of help that you're going to need. And so that's on the list. And then the other part that I didn't include in the presentation are the key messages. We were going to bring those to you at a subsequent board meeting as well, ones that have been tested, so that you start to develop your own elevator, your 30-second, 1 minute, 3 minute, speech about how you describe this to other people. And we can work on that and test that. So that's coming at a January board meeting probably. But Chair Fancher, is there other people that want to?
Yeah, does anyone else have any questions, comments? We've got a few more minutes.
I would share that this is very consistent with the work that we were successful doing at Metro multiple times to build support for investment in public infrastructure and services.
James?
Just quickly, I appreciate the conversation that Nancy and I had with Jamie. After so many board meetings and presentations, I thought I had the order of operations down, where we were approving the operating budget, collecting revenue, then electing the permanent board, dissolving the existing drainage districts, and that the new board, the non-interim board, was going to call for the GO bonds. I was incorrect. And so at some point, it might be helpful, maybe I'm just the only dense one in the room, but it might be helpful for a reprimer of the order of operations would be great. So thank you.
Nancy?
Yeah, thanks. I'll keep this brief. I just wanted to hear more about the, what was it? Advisory group? Coalition. So next time we convene in January, I'd really like to understand what that is, because I think it's not people of the board. And so is it agencies? Is it people? Is it influencers? Like,
Yeah,
I'd love help
the
with that.
small but mighty coalition. Yeah.
Looks like Dave Ritma, you have your hand up. Go for it.
I wondered if I am going to have to leave at 5, but which is now. But I wondered, how do the existing districts collect the fees that they collect now? It just seems like that they must collect it from property owners in their district, and it's not a property tax. And I realize that we're collecting from a much bigger area here, but it seems like there ought to be some way to do it for a lot less than the problems I'm seeing in your budget.
So legally, it is a property tax, and it's collected by the county on the property tax bill, and the new district does not have that authority. The legislature will not allow us to use the current method. So we don't have that option.
The existing district's assessments are considered property taxes. Oh, they are. Oh, okay. That answers my question. Thank you. And I am going to have to go. Sorry.
Thank you for asking the question.
Okay.
Well, we're right at 5 o'clock. I think it's been a great meeting. We've got lots of discussion comments. Is there anybody that has one last burning question, comment, and then we are going to look to adjourn?
Thank you for the feedback on the forecast, everyone. Keep it coming. It's really valuable, very helpful.
Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Thanks, everybody. We are officially adjourned.
Bye.